During that interview, Chris mentioned a number of things that would need to be considered during the land division process. He also mentioned that, particularly with small blocks, councils may want to know what's being built on the block. And so this leads us to the drawing of plans. For this, you can use a draftsperson or an architect. We're going to be speaking with Jim Jovanovic from Jovanovic Architecture, and Jim's going to step us through the things that we're going to need to consider while we're drawing up the plans. So let's go have a chat with Jim. Jim, thanks so much for making the time to speak with us today. To get things started, can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Well, I'm an architect, a registered architect with the Architects Board of South Australia. I have been registered since 1993, and I have been in the business for over 30 years as far as design is concerned, as a draftsman beforehand, building designer and an architect. I worked in the government for a number of years. I worked for engineers. I worked overseas as well in Singapore. And I have been in my own sole practice, Jovanovic Architecture, for now since '97, and I also did part-time managing the Archicentre in South Australia.
So Jim, how many years were you the State Manager of Archicentre?
3.5 years State Manager of Archicentre, and also consulting for Archicentre for a number of years as well.
When someone comes to engage the services of an architect, I would suspect that there's a process that would need to be followed. Can you tell us a bit about this process?
Well, the client will come to us and ask whether it's a residential or commercial development, and ask whether we can sort of do this development. Regarding that development, we need to look at the actual zoning of the area, where it's going to be located. If it's in a zone that is suitable for that particular development, then it falls into category 1, which there's no issues as far as planning is concerned. There is also some non-complying requirements also in some areas, and they're in the category 2 or 3. If category 2, then it means that the neighbouring people around the property have the right to say yes or no, and they can provide all the complaints that they can to the council by a certain date. Category 3 is a little bit more stringent, and then it has to sort of be all the neighbouring sort of zoning areas, like for instance the whole council area can complain about that particular development, whether it's on EPA requirements or whether it's on noise requirements or whatever. Or it's not suitable for the area, it devalues the property or whatever. These are the sort of issues that might be sort of coming up in category 3. If those sort of things are sort of sorted out and it's category 1, straightforward, no problem, we can go ahead and do it. Category 2 and 3, we can do the development, but however we have to wait a bit longer to have those processes carried out, in as far as 2 or 3 categories done and the processes of complaints are checked and assessed.
And if they're not passed through, then the development won't actually be allowed to go ahead?
If category 2 and 3 are not accepted, there is an alternative as well, where the actual development can be taken to an ERD court, where the court will determine whether that particular development is going to be okay or not. If the court says no, then there's no fallback as far as development is concerned. You can't go back and appeal, and that's it. If the court approves it, then you can go ahead and develop the property. Also, when we consider, the planning side of things, we have to sort of look at the whole thing as far as the brief is concerned, see what the requirements are as far as the client is concerned, what size the project is going to be, single story, 2-story, all those issues needed. Also the budget is required as well. If the budget is going to be restricting the client in as far as the design is concerned, then we have to consider that as well. Larger projects obviously take a little bit more time and more requirements as far as planning is concerned, but smaller projects seem to sort of go through much quicker. In as far as the brief is concerned, once that is completed and we have everything sorted out with the client, we can then get into the concept design. And the concept design is going to give the client a plan, elevations and some costing as far as the project is concerned. That will determine then whether that is the particular sort of style that the client wants and the size, and also whether it falls within the budget. If everything is satisfactory, then we proceed to the next stage.
Now that concept drawing would be sent to the council?
Now that's the second stage of that part is actually the planning requirements which need to be covered. And with that, we provide a planning application to the council where we have plans, elevation, site plan, and any other issues that need to be sort of checked. If it's commercial, then we also need to look at traffic control, how the vehicles go in and out of the property, if there's any occurrence as far as, you know, traffic jamming, whether it's the side streets or the main road, and we have to advise on that side of things. Also, any sort of overshadowing. If the property is 2-storey high, we have to look at it and make sure that it doesn't overshadow the adjoining properties, because if it does overshadow, we have to then work out how we can set it back to actually have that property fit in within the requirements of the planning. And we also have to sort of consider the siting of the building on the actual site, so it doesn't sort of intervene with any boundaries, etc. Once we have established all of that and it's all sorted out and the actual client is happy, we then submit the planning requirements drawings to the council. Once the planning concept is considered and taken into council, and it takes a process sometimes anything from 4 to 6 to 8 weeks, depending on the conditions of the property and what size it is, etc. The planning approval has to be given before anything else proceeds, and that's where sort of the delays sort of happen in most developments, and nothing can be done. Few sort of little sort of tweakings of the design can be achieved, but in most cases everything is stalemate at that stage until the planning approval is done. After the planning approval is completed and approved, we go into the building stage of things, where we actually develop the construction type, the building details and specification. And that takes a little bit longer as far as putting it together, and negotiations with the builders and also with the client will determine on what type of construction we can sort of do in there, and what's most economical. And in most cases, if it's developed for rental, then we always recommend that it should be looked at as far as, you know, sort of more economical consideration of construction. If it's to be used for residential for themselves, then it's a different matter. The different sort of finishes and construction can be also looked at, which is more energy efficient, etc., etc. But in most cases, we do tend to sort of consider energy efficiency and sustainability in most of our designs as far as that is concerned. If we look at the design stage of the building, because we are developing the details even further, we can then check whether we are on schedule with the budget. Because we have more detail, we know what the construction is going to be, we know what the materials we're going to use are going to be, then we can sort of recheck the actual budget, and we do the costing in a much broader and wider sort of range, and create a schedule of fees in that situation.
This would be particularly after the engineers had a look at the site as well?
Correct. Considering, you know, that the building involves quite a few different sort of specialty sort of areas, structural engineers, mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, all of those, if it's commercial, majority of those people will be involved in putting in the extra effort into it. If it's a residential sort of single-storey house or sort of duplex, then the majority of time you only need a surveyor and you need a structural engineer. The electrical and mechanical engineers are not involved in that, because you don't have huge requirements of power and sort of air conditioning sort of for residential. But commercial ones, more involvement with consultants is required. So when the full documentation is completed, what we call contract documentation or working drawings, which involves all the consultants' details It has also the full working drawings, architectural, of plan elevations, detailed sections, etc., and a full specification written. That is submitted to the council, or it can also go to a private certifier. In most cases, private certifiers tend to do it a lot quicker than the councils, but it just depends on the areas and that, and who is available, that those sort of things can be lodged either with council or with the private certifier. If the consent is given, then it's a matter of then sort of going out to tender and starting to look for builders. In that situation, we can sort of look at, if it's a large property development, we go to advertising, and if it's just a small residential sort of development, then we can invite tenders from 4 or 5 builders, and we give them normally anything from 4 to 6 weeks to do the tendering as far as pricing is concerned for the building.
And that would particularly be necessary, I guess, coming from an architect's point of view, where you're redesigning a building. The builders are going to need some time to have a look at how much material is going to be needed and how much time would it take to construct the building as well, as opposed to just one of the pull-off-the-shelf designs that the builders may have.
Absolutely. If it's a one-off design, you need to have that time for tendering. Project home builders can do that in no time, because they've done so many of those same sort of type of houses, and they know how much it's going to cost. The only difference you might have in that is actually for footings, because different areas have different types of soils, and therefore the footings are going to vary in price as far as, you know, what depth you're going to have and what reinforcing you're going to have in the footings.
Tell us a bit more about that, Jim, because just before you were on camera, we were speaking about the reactivity of soils around Adelaide. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Adelaide is well known for reactive soils, and it can either shrink or it can expand. And this is the biggest problem that we have in the building industry at the moment, in as far as Adelaide is concerned. And a lot of construction methods have to be considered in articulating it, mainly to stop the cracking, to stop the movements, etc. Footings can vary in price considerably, whether in the eastern suburbs compared to the western suburbs. The main areas of reactive soils that we have in Adelaide span all the way from the northern suburbs like Craigmore and Blakeview, all the way across the foothills and going right through the eastern suburbs and going south towards Darlington and Seacombe Heights. And some of the other sort of inner suburbs, you know, like Unley and St Peters, etc., they can also have some sort of reactive soils in there as well, which is very known through the Archicentre sort of standard sort of surveys that they do, that Unley is one of the worst sort of suburbs for cracking, but that doesn't mean you can't have wonderful buildings in there as well.
That really just comes down to the engineers designing what needs to be designed into the property.
Absolutely. Footings will either be pier and beam, or they can be raft, typical raft slab, or they can be grillage raft, or they can be waffle pod, you know. So there's a variety of different footings for different soil conditions and that. And the deeper they are, the more they cost. When people go out to tender, as far as whether it's a large project or a small project, they have to make sure that they are going to the correct people as far as tendering is concerned. They must be licensed builders, they have to have a current licence, and they have to have a track record of good work. It's no good going to somebody that you completely don't know and have no idea who they are and hoping that they will give you the right thing. Architects normally have a list of builders who have done jobs for them before, and they know their track record, and it's always recommended that you go with those type of builders. In some cases, yes, new builders can be good, but you need to have some references as far as that is concerned. The next thing that people have to consider is the type of contract that's signed. Once the tenderer is selected and conditions checked and made sure that they can do the job in time, a contract has to be signed between the builder and the client, the owners, and that particular contract should be the one that's administered by an architect and not a building contract, because there is a difference in those. A builder's contract will mainly be favoured towards the builder. However, an administered contract will be mainly favouring the owners or the client and give them a bigger right than the builder. In those, you will have defects liability periods, you will have liquidated damages clauses, and you also have defects liability periods, which are much better than in the standard building contracts. So those three items are more important to anybody else in the building industry than the builder himself, because developers need to have liquidated damages in their contract. If they don't have that particular clause in the contract, it means that if the project is delayed and takes longer to do, they won't have an income. So therefore, for every week that the project is delayed, the liquidated damages clause will give them that fallback where they can sort of claim the money back from the builder.
Are there some instances where builders just won't sign those kind of contracts?
In most residential areas, people tend to sort of eliminate those because the builders won't sign contracts, or if they do, the price will be higher. In commercial, they will sign it, but with some sort of compensation involved in there as well. But it'll be silly not to have a liquidated damages clause in there. Even if you have $1 in there, it's better than nothing. Once the contract is signed between the client and the builder, it's important to have a schedule in place from the builder on what the construction is going to be, and week by week. And that schedule should be sort of kept to, and the architect administering the contract should follow that strictly to allow the construction to follow smoothly. And if you don't have a schedule, it means that anything can happen and you don't sort of have anything to follow on. So it's important to have a schedule there. Also a breakdown of the costs. It's important either by trade, or even in some cases, if it's a larger project, it might be even broken down like a bill of quantities, where you have different sort of areas of materials and work and etc., and the fittings and fixtures and all that. But in most cases, it's just a matter of trade sort of breakdowns. So it's also easy to understand, okay, where the money is going to go, whether it's the footings, the carpentry, the cabinet making, roofing, etc., plumbing. So it's important to have that before anything starts. Once the whole project starts, it's a matter of then to understand that you have insurances in place, that everything is approved, and there's no fallbacks afterwards, you know, on something that hasn't been done. Because any project over $12,000 has to be insured before anything starts. So that's the important part also to check. During the process of construction, the worst thing that can happen is variations. And if the documentation is done properly, then the variations are reduced. If for any reason the project suddenly sort of comes up and there's a lot of variations in it, especially structural variations, the cost can balloon. But try to sort of keep variations to a minimum in all the projects, and make sure that you don't change anything during the actual construction in as far as design is concerned. That's the most important part. But variations are always assessed by the architect and making sure that the builder is not overcharging for things. And they have to be approved by the architect before anything is paid or starting to work. Regular inspections should also be considered in most cases, whether it's by the architect, by the supervisors, by the owners. In most cases, for larger projects, site inspections and meetings should be always arranged by all parties. That means the architect, the builder and the owners, and negotiate anything that sort of is not working or not on schedule, and come to amicable solutions in as far as, you know, bringing that to the proper sort of standard. In as far as any problems that are occurring, communication should always be through the architect. Owner should not talk directly to the builder, and the builder should not talk directly to the owner. There should be a communication through the architect so the architect can administer the contract properly and give out instructions either to the builder or to the owners in as far as what needs to be done. If that chain of communication is not carried out, lots of problems can occur. And as far as, legal problems, things are done which an architect doesn't know about, and costs can balloon out. So therefore it's important to have that chain of communication right from the beginning. On completion of a project, once everything is worked out and the project is come to a final sort of presentation to the owners, the architect and the owners should go through the building, including the builder as well in most cases, and go through and check any defects, and a list should be made and given to the builder to fix. This particular list should be sort of worked out and the work proceeding sort of done before the final payment is made. Once the final payment is made, that means that everything is all completed. And then we get into a defects liability period, which can vary, depending on the size of the project, anything from 13 weeks to 52 weeks. In most cases, domestic construction, it's about 13 weeks. If it's a larger sort of residential or commercial sort of construction, sort of standard sort of thing, then it can be for 26 weeks. And if it's a huge commercial or residential development like apartments or office buildings, etc., it can go to 12 months.
When you talk about defect liabilities, what specifically would you mean?
Okay, within that particular period, within the period of defects liability, all sorts of things can happen. Locks can get loose and move. Taps can suddenly be loose and fall off. Things are not working properly. The air conditioning doesn't work, or the cooktop is not working, or there is a blockage in the sewer, or whatever. Various things, some cracking, some movement in the building has occurred due to structural elements moving and not being the right size or whatever. And all of these things will be picked up just before the end of the defects liability period, which is about, say, 2 weeks before the end of the defects liability period. A list is made again of all the defects and passed on to the builder. The builder then has to sort of fix all of those things within that particular period, and at the end of it, all of that should be fixed, and then a retention of money which was kept, which is 2.5% of the total cost of the construction, is then given back to the builder as payment after that defects liability is finished and everything is made good. And in most cases, people should be sort of aware that state legislation says that there is a 5-year structural warranty on the buildings. So even though the defects liability period is over, there is still a 5-year sort of period where any structural problems occur, the builder has to come back and fix them.
This, for example, we mentioned reactive soil earlier on. If, for example, a foundation cracks 2 years after the property's been built or the building's been built, what's the situation there? I mean, I would assume that the liability would have to also fall on the engineer as well.
Well, the first person that people should be contacting is the builder and the engineer. They will come out and inspect it, and once that inspection is done, it'll be determined why that crack has occurred. If, for instance, there is a problem in as far as not enough reinforcing in there, then it will fall back again on the engineer, because they should have checked the footings prior to pouring and making sure that the reinforcing in there is correct. And a certificate should have been issued also beforehand, before the pouring, to actually say everything is satisfactory. And then the pouring occurs. But there could be a problem that a sudden change in soil movement has occurred, which is beyond the sort of required design, and these sort of things can happen. And then it's a matter of then negotiating and working out whose insurance is going to pay for that. and in most cases it's the last man standing.
And you got his certificates to be issued?
Once everything is completed, defects liability period is done, everything is paid for, then you issue a certificate of completion, and also that particular certificate is also Schedule 19A, which also goes to the council, which the builder signs and says that they have completed everything in as far as the design is concerned and in accordance with the design, and they sort of submit that to council, and that means that they have this warranty of 5 years, upon themselves, until that expiration of 5 years is finished.
Okay. Given that people's perceptions often have a bearing on prices, what someone's willing to pay for something, how valuable do you think an architect is in that situation in designing a building that would be more appealing?
As far as architects are concerned, you're dealing with a professional. Now, if you want to deal with a sub-professional, that's up to the person, whoever decides to do the development. However, the architect knows the process. The architect will provide the best possible solution for the problem. They will also make sure that they look after the project all the way through, and they will provide them the best possible answers all the way through. Also, they are insured, so therefore you don't have any issues as far as any problems occurring with the designs, with the supervision, with the any other sort of elements of the architectural services. In as far as looking after the project and administering it, that's the most important, because the administration of the contract is very, very important, mainly because all sorts of things can happen. Design is one thing, administering the contract is another. Through the design you have a picture which tells you what the project will look like and what needs to be put into it to finish it off. However, during the construction, if you don't have an architect administering the contract, the builder can change a lot of things without the owner knowing, because they feel that it might be simpler and easier for them to do so, not knowing what the requirements were and as far as the design is concerned and what the client wanted. And by the time it's finished, it may not be the same thing as what the original design was intended to be. So therefore, with the architect looking after the project, you will have the final thing looking exactly to what it was intended to be.
In the event that a builder does go ahead and change some things, is there any recourse that the owner, any avenue that the owner can pursue?
The owners can question that, obviously, and in most cases it's too late to question. So therefore, they will sort of just have to accept it. If they are very astute and they follow the construction very close, they might see some changes and they might sort of say, well, why are you doing this? I wanted it done this way. Then yes, you can sort of stop the builder from doing what they were doing. In most cases, it's either the material that's changed and it's covered up and you don't know, and the reason that the builder changed it is because it might be slightly cheaper. They have not costed it properly in the beginning, so they're looking for alternatives and sort of reduce the cost and increase their profit and not loss. And once it's covered up, nobody knows. However, the reason that the architect has said, I want Western Red Cedar instead of Meranti is because Western Red Cedar is more durable and it lasts longer. And if it's painted and covered up, nobody will know. But then down the period of, say, 2 years, the Meranti will rot. Well, the Western Red Cedar won't. And then all of a sudden you have this other sort of cost that you need for maintenance.
Jim, can you step us through the process of how an architect can actually help get plans through council?
Well, the planning part of the whole process is the most important one. If the planning is processed properly, then the rest of it is all easy. And in most cases, planning can be a difficult situation because some of the projects may not be falling within the required sort of planning regulations. So with the architectural plans going through the council, if there is any issue, the architect can go in and negotiate with the planners on the design of the building. they can sort of comment on things like, you know, why it is on the boundary and not away from the boundary, why is it set back, and why is the shape, you know, the way it is of the building. So the planners are not going to sort of restrict everything by the book, and the architect can actually sort of advise of why the compensation was made on a particular planning requirement and not the way it is written in the book.
And can this be done together with a private town planner?
Absolutely. Whether it's a private town planner or whether it's a council planner or whoever is there, this is important, because the architect will negotiate on the design and make sure that they are actually covering everything required within the planning regulations, but also look at the compensations that can be made and taken sort of further than just the planning requirements. It's not always black and white, and there is some sort of ways of changing things. So therefore, you know, architect knows the planning regulations. They know how far they can sort of take the extreme and develop the whole thing to suit and comply with the planning regulation, but also give the client the right development as well.
We previously interviewed Jeff Smith, who is also a private town planner, and I think that also using someone like that as well would also be extremely valuable, working together with someone like an architect to be able to help get the plans through council. I think that would be valuable. What's your take on that?
Absolutely. In most cases, there's quite a few consultants that can be used prior to any sort of design is completely finished. Whether it's a planner, whether it's a building surveyor, whether it's an engineer, it's important to have those people talking to the client and to the architect and discussing the whole process before all the final sort of planning requirements are met, because everybody has a different need in as far as, you know, the space required for things and how things are put together. And engineers, surveyors, planners, building surveyors all have different fields that they are experts in. So therefore it's important to have those on board for larger projects. Residential is not an issue, but commercial projects are more important for that part of things. And as we said before, you know, traffic control is also important in that situation too.
Okay. Jim, thanks so much for making the time to speak with us today.
Pleasure, always.